Everyone's gathering in the cafe. We let them all in to find seats, and we'll get started in a moment. But good that you were able to get in. See a lot of familiar names and some not so familiar joining. It's good. Good to have some new people. So let's um, let's get started. Natasha, if you want to start the recording. Welcome everybody. Great to see you again for our EOcafe. This has been quite a I think a successful, and we've really enjoyed organizing the EO cafes. Reminder that it's meant just as sort of a fairly informal get together. Um, we try to bring together speakers, participants, people to come into the cafe for subjects of interest to the EO community, and then um, invite people to join us. So the idea is that I have a chat with our three guests today. We'll continue that chat, and then you can join in later on as we go through the afternoon, through the session. Today, we want to look at the Sustainable Development Goals, and more particularly how industry can contribute to them. Before I introduce the guests, though, just a reminder on the rules. Please, if you're not speaking, keep your microphone off. You're very welcome to keep cameras on. We like people to keep cameras on because it gives us a nice feeling to see everyone again. And if you want to ask questions, please do so in the chat. The chat is at the bottom of the screen. Just enter your question, and when it comes to the question session, I'll ask you to ask your question and to engage directly. So please join in the conversation with our speakers and myself today. Our guests today, we have three guests. Firstly, Greg Scott from the UNGGIM in New York. Secondly, Mark Paganini from ESA in Rome, and then Kevin McCormack from the Statistics Office in Ireland, in Cork. And I'll introduce them again when it comes to speaking. So to give a little bit of the background, in 2015, the United Nations adopted the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. That led to a plan of action with 5 Ps: people, planet, prosperity, peace, and partnership. One of my favorite words. Um, and they defined 17 sustainable development goals. I imagine most people are familiar with those. 169 targets and 231 indicators. And Greg will tell us more about those as we go along. And this was all put into a global indicator framework, which allows countries and the global community to measure, manage, and monitor progress against the goals. Um, and as I say, Greg will talk more about that. Then this is implemented very much by at national level, and Kevin will be able to tell us more about how particularly Ireland has responded, but also in a broader perspective from his role um, the community. So EO has a powerful contribution to make to the Sustainable Development Goals. In our conversation yesterday, Greg was talking about how it was regrettable that Earth observation was not taken into account when the indicators were defined, and I guess Greg, you can build on that in a minute. But there's overall general agreement that Earth observation can play a big role. So we want to discuss that, and we want to understand how industry can be more involved. And so our goal is to help companies understand how they can become more involved in the process to deliver on the Sustainable Development Goals and to deliver information to meet the indicators. But I'll stop there because our guests will talk more about those things. So I'm going to ask each of our guests to speak for 5 minutes. They've all got some slides to show to back up what they're going to say. Then we'll have a conversation as a result of those their interventions and asking questions, and then we'll open it to the floor as we go along. So I'm going to start with sort of the international perspective from Greg. Greg has many years of experience in developing and implementing geographic information solutions to meet societal challenges. He's currently the interregional advisor to the UN GGIM, which brings together experts in global geospatial information management. And that reports as part of the UN Statistical Division. So, Greg, thank you very much for joining us, and I'll give you the floor.
Thanks, Jeff. It's good to be here. Welcome, everyone. Good to have a nice informal chat today on this really good topic. What I wanted to do was just give a bit of a contextual overview on the SDGs as a starting point. And I know many of us actually have a pretty good idea on what the 17 Sustainable Development Goals are. But I thought I'd just give a bit of background on some of its development and why the pieces of the SDGs fit together. So I've just got 3 slides that you'll see very, very quickly as I just walk through this. The first one is just looking at, I guess, when we think about the goals on the left-hand side there, we have 17 goals, but it's the 2030 agenda, the 2030 agenda for sustainable development that actually created the goals as an integrated plan of action. As you can see on the right-hand side, this is the 4 main parts of the 2030 agenda as this plan of action. And the top left is the declaration itself, the actual agenda. It has all the vision and the principles around, as Jeff just said, people, planet, prosperity, peace, and partnership. It also determined, and when I say it determined, that was the United Nations General Assembly, so all of the member states determined the 17 integrated and indivisible goals. But it also determined the targets, the 169 targets. And for means of implementation, obviously it's government, civil society, and importantly needed the role of industry and science and technology in that. What the 2030 agenda did not determine was, under follow-up and review, the global indicators. So the global indicators that underpin the 17 goals and the 169 targets were actually determined separately by the UN Statistical Commission over an 18-month to two-year period. But coming back to the 2030 agenda itself, so what does it mean for us? What does it mean about our EO community? So if we have a look at this next slide, the 2030 agenda itself actually has explicitly written into it, particularly under Goal 17, Partnerships for the Goals, is a requirement. And here I'm just going to quote the direct words out of the agenda itself. And it's about supporting, obviously, developing countries. And particularly the right-hand side is to ensure access to high quality, timely, reliable, and disaggregated data. And you'll see their strengthening capacity of statistical officers. And the reason being is that the indicator framework was developed by the Statistical Commission as an outcome of the role they had played in the Millennium Development Goals, the 8 goals of the MDGs from the year 2000 to 2015. But what we did get into the 2030 agenda through a lot of hard work was the underlying words about exploiting the contribution to be made by a wide range of data, including Earth observation, and they missed out the S, Earth observations, and geospatial information. And as a mean of action to that, part of that need was to increase significantly the availability of high quality, timely, and reliable data, disaggregated by income, gender, age, race, ethnicity, migratory status, disability, etc. All statistical data, but also by geographic location. So key linkages there to Earth observations and geospatial information. And this is my last slide now, and this ties back to this framework of the 2030 agenda, where we have 17 goals and 169 targets in the pyramid. Those two parts of the pyramid are green because they were determined by the member states, by the General Assembly themselves. Separate to that was the global indicators. And Jeff said 231 global indicators. And you'll note there I've got 232. That's okay, because one indicator is used twice across two goals. So he's not wrong. But what was really critical to this is that when we think about implementation, means of implementation, it's not only through governments and civil society and industry. There's got to be mechanisms to do that. We need planning processes, we need policies, we need strategies, and we need frameworks. You have to have a framing to actually derive some of these. And at the very bottom there, and this was in red when I first did this slide, because at that point in time, the data that was required was not known. So it was really critical to understand, to measure and monitor, was this requirement for not only an unprecedented amount of data, but new data that was not used for the MDGs, much more diverse, much more comprehensive, much more integrated across multiple sectors. And really the key pillars of those data requirements, in my view, and has proven to be so since then, really come down to statistics, geospatial information, Earth observations. Yes, other big data, other data sources, but the framing and the connection has been through those sorts of means. And I think that's really an important process that we in the UN and UNGGIAM have used as a leverage in the past 5 years as to how do we implement the SDGs, what frameworks do we use, and how do we best leverage Earth observations and other data, which is not traditionally well understood by many out in the community, particularly the statistical community, and particularly decision makers and permanent missions and ambassadors. And so this is part of that journey we've had to work through. So with that, Jeff, I'll stop there with that brief introduction. I will just add to the point you made is, as I said, the indicator framework was determined through a statistical process, through a statistical lens. And unfortunately, it was done in a way, and again, in my view, where there was not enough input from the EO and GI communities into those indicators. And as an outcome, trying to bring data to support many of the indicators, which are tiered as well into 3 tiers, has proved difficult in these first few years of the SDGs in terms of gaining some of that momentum, particularly in developing countries. Thanks, Jeff. I'll pause here.
Greg, thank you very much indeed. Yeah, just checking I was not on mute. Thank you. That's a great introduction. I think it gives the framework in which we can carry on the discussion. So I'm going to now ask Mark, who's working at European level in ESA. Mark is part of the EO exploitation and services group working in ESA in Rome. With a particular focus on environmental governance and sustainable development. Mark is also part of the ESA representation on a number of the international committees that are representing the conventions, different conventions that have been put in place, and is leading a lot of the ESA work on SDGs. So Mark, let me give you the floor.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks for inviting me and giving me this opportunity to share with you some ideas on how the Earth observation private sectors can play a more prominent role in the implementation of the 2030 agenda. So I also prepared a few slides. I mean, it would be nice if we could show these slides. And I would like to start also from the importance of data in the SDGs. And here I will probably repeat a bit what Craig has said, because one of the major lessons learned from the 2015 Millennium Development Goals has been the importance of data in the development agenda. This was captured in the Article 76 of the UN resolutions on the 2030 agenda, where it's clearly stated that it is essential to scale up the contributions of new data sources, including Earth observation, and mainstream these technologies in the activities of the NSOs, the National Statistical Office. And Craig said it very well before me. So there's been many UN studies on big data for sustainable development, and they all stress, and if you read what is put on the bottom left, the fact that new source of data, such as satellite data, but also new technologies, new analytical approach, can enable more evidence-based decision making. It can better measure progress on SDGs in a way that is both inclusive and fair. So since 2015, we have been very active in promoting the value of Earth observations for the SDGs. You can see on this slide a report by GEO, the Group on Earth Observation, and which illustrates the value of Earth observation for the SDGs through several case studies. Then I think it was 1 year later in 2018 with the Committee on Earth Observation Satellite CRs, we did this UN book on SDGs to broaden a bit the understanding of the strategic importance of satellite data for the 2030 agenda. There was also the fact sheets, important to mention this, by the European Commission to showcase the value of Copernicus services for the SDGs, and this was done in 2019. And this year we recently, while it's not yet fully published, a recent technical report that was funded by ESA and which analyzed in details the contributions of Earth observation for the targets and indicators. So all these reports are made available on the portal of the EO for SDG initiative from the Group on Earth Observations, and you have the hyperlink here. Next slide, please. The next slide tries to summarize, a bit complex, but tries to summarize the importance of Earth observation for the targets and the indicators. And I draw your attention to the table on the right, where you can see one row for each of the 17 goals, with the targets on the left and the indicators on the right. For what concerns the relevance of Earth observation for the SDG indicators, we use two color schemes to make a distinction between those where Earth observation can provide direct measures, and they're indicated in green, and those where Earth observation can potentially contribute, and those are indicated in yellow. On the left, you see the list of these indicators with a very short description so that you can understand the field of application. So just a few words, but just for you to understand. And you would easily understand also that the indicators are very precisely defined, which limits actually the use of Earth observation to the variables indicated in the methodology. And it's also very important to understand, and Craig said it many times before, that the SDG indicators have been defined from a statistical perspective and did not consider all the potential of Earth observation. And another key message I would like to bring to you is the fact that the relevance of Earth observation is much broader if we consider the SDG targets than the SDG indicators, and which is, I guess you would understand why. And I'm sure we'll come back to these considerations during our discussion, because we should never forget the targets as well. We should not focus only on the indicators. Next slide, please. And this is my last slide. It's quite a busy slide. This last slide shows, if we could, yeah, that one, shows how the Earth observation community has organized itself to scale up the integration of Earth observation in the 2030 agenda. So we are organized under the umbrella of this GEO EO4SDG initiative, to which, by the way, EARTH is a member. And you see on this slide the governance system that has been in place by the United Nations on the global indicator framework, and this is a lot on the indicators. It's done under the supervision of the UN Statistical Commission and its interagency and expert group on SDG indicators. And the principle is very simple. The 2030 agenda is defined by the UN with the participation, of course, of all stakeholders, including the countries, and it's to be implemented essentially by countries. So important actors are also the Working Group on Geospatial Information, which is, by the way, co-led by Kevin, who will talk after me, the UN Specialized Agency, which we call also custodial agencies, like FAO, UN Habitat, or UNEP, and the countries that are represented by their national statistical offices and the line ministries that are responsible for given indicators. And the EO community essentially works on 6 lines of activities that are represented in the circles. So with the United Nations, we support them in developing the good practice guidance for the countries and making available global and regional data sets, which can be used as sort of default data by countries which have limited access to data. With the countries, we developed capacities and help them in streaming Earth observation in their systems and processes. And then we work also with the broad Earth observation community to facilitate access to these EO enabling infrastructures for an easy appropriation by the countries. And of course, all the knowledge need to be shared with the UN and with the countries, which is an essential part of our work. And now the last thing is very important. So I've tried to show in the slides at the bottom of this slide how much the EO private sectors have been engaged in this line of activities with respect to the potential that you can offer. For this, I use a scale of 5 levels. And of course, this represents my personal opinion. So for the global and regional data sets, this has mainly been done through your participation to the Copernicus services at global and pan-European levels. I will come back to this during the discussions. For the good practice guidance, only a few companies have been involved in supporting the custodian agencies developing the guidelines, I must say. For what concerns the countries, many skill transfers activities have taken place, I must say, especially in the developing world, thanks to the projects funded by the Commission and by ESA. And some of you have also been in direct contact with your national statistical offices. On the EO in enabling infrastructures, we all know that there's a very large proliferations of platforms. I could mention the DIAS, the thematic exploitation platforms, the data cubes, and many others. What is missing is the integration of these infrastructures, your infrastructures, in the national systems. And let's hope that I will address this during our discussions. And the last part is the knowledge, the Earth observation knowledge sharing, and which is probably the area where we need to act urgently to bring all the knowledge and the expertise you have to the SDG stakeholders and in particular to the countries. All of this is, of course, a matter of debate. You might not fully agree with what I said, but I hope that these considerations will stimulate some discussions we will have later. And with this, and it over to you, Jeff, for the next speaker.
Thanks, Mark. That's really good, and to try to shed some light on some of the processes that are going on, where we can look to try to see what further involvement there can be from industry, and we should certainly come back to that shortly. So our last speaker, I'm very happy to welcome here, Kevin McCormack from the Statistics Office in Ireland. As we've seen, it's really the national statistical offices are really at the heart of this effort, and so we felt it was good to understand from a national perspective how this is working and how the national statistical offices are viewing things. So Kevin is the lead statistician for Ireland's response to the SDGs. But Kevin is also a member of the interagency expert group with the UN and co-chairs the expert group on SDG indicators. So Kevin is really the right person to tell us how to get further involved. Kevin, the floor is yours.
Okay, Jeff, hopefully you can hear me. I have some audio issues. Okay, so could I have the first slide up, please?
We hear you fine, Kevin.
Okay, so while I'm waiting for the first slide, I'd like to, Jeff, thank you and everybody else for inviting me here today. Of course, I'm one of the bad guys. I'm from the statistical community. So okay, so in terms of SDGs, I never realized how much of a bad guy I was. But anyway, so the SDGs from an NSO's perspective. So in Ireland, what we did is we decided to build a reporting ecosystem around tools that we had available to ourselves. So here's a schema of the SDG reporting ecosystem from Ireland. So of course, as a statistical office, and it's my job actually to go and gather the data for the indicators. So I gathered the data. I think we've about I think there's 239 indicators. We've data for around 85% of them. So what we do is that we put them into our stat bank, which is a WebPX environment for a main dissemination tool. Yet again, because we're CSO, we have a Statistics Act, which means that we can reach out to different government departments, agencies, offices, or other agencies and offices and request the data from them. The data then comes in, we store it, and then we start to share it. We share it in two ways. First of all, is that we get the data and we first of all put on a geospatial identifier. So in this particular part of it, which is the left-hand side of this particular slide here, you'll see that we're using the UNECE's GSBPM, which is a business process model, statistical business process model. We're looking at the ISGI and the SGF. So the GSGF is what we're actually trying to do. So this is where we're bringing statistics and geospatial identifiers together. What do we do then? We built an indicators platform, which is built within the environment of the IGIF. That's hosted by our colleagues in Ireland Survey Ireland, which is the mapping agency in Ireland, and it's built within the Esri technology. From there, visualization can occur to downloading of data. Here, I just have a small little schema at the top where we have road debts in Ireland at a county level. There's 26 geographies here. For those who might have heard this before, we have road debts, and those dark areas are high road debts, and that is the areas in Ireland where there's rallying, road racing. So we feel that the younger, mostly younger men, are trying to follow the professionals, and you have a lot of road debts in these particular areas. Yet again, the visualization is good, and it brings the data to life. We then have a direct link to the UNSD division using a federated system. So it's direct link an Esri tool to an Esri tool. However, from Ireland, we know that not all users will be able to engage with an Esri environment. So what we've done is that we, from our stat bank, the SDG data can be directly downloaded by our users. As I said, it can be downloaded from the indicators platform using the APIs, but it can also be downloaded from our stat bank. What we then have done is that we've provided tutorials at a very introductory level in order to help our users move into the area of geospatial visualization, and we have all Python tutorials provided. That allows us then to engage. Yet again, as I said, we're in a GIS environment, which is the Esri tool, but also then in a more holistic way to the statistical community through Aura and Python. So can I have the next slide, please? So the pandemic hit, and data is key. Geospatial location is also key. So what we're able to do, we're able to quickly turn our attention to the COVID-19 pandemic in Ireland. We had structures in places. There's data governance boards. I chair the one for the SDGs, and I'm also on the data governance board for the pandemic COVID-19. So the data then is to be sourced. It's to be sourced from health authorities. It's the first time ever that the health authorities have shared data outside their own environments. So yet again, we use our Stats Act of 1993. This is all on the left-hand side, and it comes to the CSO. Because the data, of course, is sensitive, what we do is we anonymize statistical data, and then we push it to the GeoHive platform again. So we were able to reimagine the SDG platform. And what we did here is that we built dashboards. So here's an example of the Irish dashboard here in the center at the very top, and that's access to, it's open access to the public where information can be downloaded. Daily updates are there. There's about the pandemic, hospitalizations, number of individuals in the ICU, number of lab tests being undertaken. It's all there for people to reference to. Now, including what we have is restricted area access. So the two examples here, the one, the second one on the center, which is on the bottom, it's our police force. It's called Garda Síochána. It's the Gaelic for policing service. Here is what we have is travel sensors being visualized around the Greater Dublin. Lockdown occurs, and what you want to be able to do then is see are people adhering to the lockdown or not. So as these circles get larger and larger, there's a higher volume of traffic. So once the lockdown comes in, these are time enabled. we're able to feed back to our police force if and where lockdown potentially could be broken, and that allows them to plan their activities, roadblocks, and so forth. On the right-hand side, then we have another one which is from our local authorities. So these are the local municipal areas, and they're supporting their populations. There might be phone calls, emergency calls, maybe elderly people looking for food. This all can be logged. Then, if we then we come back to the left-hand side again, you see that the CSO is also supplying the pandemic modelers. This is the epidemiological data. So our pandemic modelers are working directly with the data that we're sourced from CSO, and we're ensuring that the data that they have is up to date as possible. There's no breaches in terms of confidentiality, in other words, identification of patient information and so forth. So that has allowed us, as I said, we had an SDG environment, we were able to quickly move into this COVID-19 reporting system environment, and that's what's there. So going on to my last slide then, if I could, which I suppose reports directly into what we're discussing here, it's Earth observations. So Earth observations is very much a black art to the statistical community. And very much as the approach that we've used for geospatial visualization, what we're trying to do is provide tutorials at a very introductory level. The technology around Earth observations, from my perspective, could leave people behind, because I'm an expert in employment or the area of IRT, which is item response theory. It's about how people can react to different questions and what level of knowledge they need to be able to adhere to that. And this is what you're facing in terms of Earth observations. Technically, it's a challenge understanding what's going on and how to use the tools that are available. Because, of course, we're a stats office and OR is one of the free tools that are there, what we looked at is to do some simulations in terms of 15.3.1, which is our mountain greenery index. So what we had is two approaches. One on the left-hand side is use pre-existing geocoded points for mountains and plotting to vegetation maps, the NDVI map for designated mountains. And on the other side, use a data set of altitude points higher than 600 meters based on terrain elevation. And these are then plotted on the NDV or the vegetation map. And then we know the advantage of that from our side is that there's a great number of data points generated. So what we're trying to do is walk people through it. So each of the methods consists of the following steps. Use one geospatial data set, polygons or rasters with basic information. Use one geospatial data set with the vegetation information. Could be NDVI map derived from Sentinel-2, for example. Looking to preclude more sophisticated vegetation data sets, and ideally based on cloud-free data. Now, that's an issue for Ireland because from our Ireland survey colleagues, it seems that we have only 35 days in the whole of the year in Ireland where we don't have some sort of cloud covering. So those used from the UK would suffer the same things that we have. It can be quite dark and grey in Ireland. So without going too much into it, yet again, using the OR packages, for example, raster and SF, and some more recent ones we've been looking at, what we're able to do is produce maps. As you can see, Ireland is not a very mountainous country, so these are the areas where we have elevations over 600 meters, and this is to allow us to engage in producing this mountain green index calculations. So from my point is that certainly in terms of the visualization, it's also in terms of Earth observations, I have to push this out as much as I can and through the statistical community into the different government agencies on how we can use the EO to provide data for the SDGs. Also, I found recently I think it was a publication or a report from Portugal where they had been using some observation, I think it's Landsat and Sentinel, and they were looking at the volume of water that they have in reservoirs. I found it very interesting. It was all done in OR. So I think from my perspective, there are certainly opportunities through that particular OR packages to engage back into the statistical community. So you've seen kind of how we've been engaging across in the SDGs and the GIS tools, and now how we're looking at producing some SDG indicators using the Earth observations. But the key piece that I will say is that, you know, any of the knowledge transfer has to be done very much at a basic introductory level for individuals to get motivated people engaged. And once they're then engaged, you'd be surprised how quickly they can take on responsibilities and provide information. One of the approaches I use certainly for the visualization is that within the European, the EU, what we have, the national statistical offices have an OR conference each year, and I had one of my colleagues present our tutorial on visualization. We use actually Tanzania as the example, and in the same day, within about 10 minutes there, our colleagues from Iceland suddenly start visualizing their labour force survey from the tutorial that we had presented, or should I say my colleague had presented. So I would think that certainly using simple examples where people can basically get involved with their observations and the tools and understandings would be very, very, very useful. Okay, that's it. Thank you for that, Jeff. Thank you.
Kevin, thank you very much indeed. So EO is a black art for the statistical community. Mark, Greg, what are we doing about that, and what could be done more to help our colleagues in the statistical community to understand better what can be given to them?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's a bit of an evolving dilemma. Now, what I will say is just coming back to what Kevin said about being the bad guy in the group. I think you can see already why he's here. He's one of our leaders and actually telling the message, and I think that's what's really important. The key part is being able to communicate this value proposition and what's important and where does EO and geospatial fit together. And critically, what Kevin also covered really, really critically was a marriage between the statistical organization and the geospatial organization. And I think there's opportunity for that marriage to grow even further out into space agencies as well. And we know that, and that's work in progress. In the UN process, we're seeing more and more, and I guess this was if I come back a step, a challenge for many of us, including a lot of us in this conversation, is that when the 2030 agenda was adopted in September 2015, on the 1st of January, the 2030 agenda came into being. And so we were measuring and monitoring on the 1st of January. And the first report was in July of 2016, barely 6 months in. No one had any clue what to do. We're now 5 years down the track, and we're starting to get an understanding of what data is needed, and we're seeing refinements. But in that process, for all of the frustration, is that many organizations, statistical offices, other government agencies, departments of foreign affairs understand now Earth observations a lot more. Why? Because that's been the big gap. It's easy when you look at indicators, you can look at statistical data, but when you're trying to think about monitoring climate change, particularly at global levels, and we're thinking about carbon and all these sorts of things, and about deforestation and many other elements, is that sometimes the global data is much more frequent, regular, and accurate than national data. And its resolution and quality is getting just higher and higher each year. The problem is that that's not well understood. And so there's processes already in train where they'll use tried and true methods that have been in place for many years. And it's changing. I know in our own division and our working group on big data, they actually have a task team on Earth observations. And why is that really important? Because the statistical community now knows that they cannot do crop statistics without EO. It just doesn't work. You can't go out into a paddock and do a measurement every year. That doesn't work. And now, instead of looking at an annual measurement, they're looking at, you have crop rotation, you have fall periods. We all know this, but now the statistical and other communities are realizing the richness of this data and the fact that you can report at much greater levels of granularity, but also of repeat rate. And so they're learning, but it's a journey. And the hard part is to tell it in simple language, but use the examples, the case studies, the visualizations. One of the tests that I get asked all the time from my own division is that because statistical data has to be official data, and I'm using this as just one example, is that when we talk about, whether you use, say, Copernicus data, Landsat data, anything that's basically got time series to it, the first thing they'll ask is, what is the algorithm? Because we want to know if that algorithm can be validated. What's the error? What's the, so, well, wait a minute. You want to ask about an algorithm on high resolution data for something that you would have originally used for an estimate. So perhaps think about the fact that if you're using continual and machine learning and repeat rates, you will have an error rate, but that error rate is constant and can be refined. And it's marginal compared to doing estimates on an annual basis, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So there's a psychological change in the thinking of what the data can do, rather than say, give me an annual statistic.
Yeah.
But it's happening. It's getting there.
Yeah. So hearts and minds. One of the things that struck me as we were talking then, and as Kevin was talking earlier, was the pace of change. I mean, this started in 2015. 2015, we probably had one Sentinel satellite launched, and since then there've been additional 7 satellites, plus all the commercial initiatives that are taking place and commercial satellites that are being launched, some of which are geared very much towards SDG and environmental monitoring. So the data that's becoming available is vast, and keeping people aware of the potential from that it really is quite a big job, an enormous task. Mark, you have any comments to make around that aspect from ESA's perspective?
Yeah. Craig said a lot. I must say that it's clear that on the statistical side, there is already a work to be done, and this is happening. A work to be done for the statistical community to integrate geospatial information into the statistics. And that's the work that Craig is doing with his team, with the UNGGIM, where they bring together the mapping agencies and the statistical communities together. And this is already a major achievement, I think, for us, because as soon as the statistical office starts to adopt geospatial information, the move to Earth observation is definitely much less important. Let's say the step is less important. It's clear that in ESA, but not only in ESA, I think in most of the Earth observation projects, the project that we've done with the with the National Statistical Offices has always been quite marginal. And independently of the SDGs, even before the SDGs, because we could have done projects before, and I did some project with them, and I have some case studies where they use Earth observation data. I mean, a very nice case in Austria and in Sweden, for examples, and I felt that, and it's strange in a way, that the main problem was trust. And that, I don't know, for whatever reason, the statistical, I think Kevin can say something about this, but maybe because it's a black box for them, they don't trust the data as much as they trust their own statistics. But if you think about EO, you wonder, how can statisticians trust more a sampling scheme than a wall-to-wall mapping, where we map everything and we derive the statistics from mapping every single piece of land. And it's difficult for us to understand, but if you come from the statistical perspective, it's a cultural change. So the trust comes from a cultural change from their side. And but in the context of the SDGs, and I will be brief on this one, you have it's clear that the we need to convince the statistical community, both at the UN and at the national levels. But we also work, in the context of the SDGs, we also work with the custodian agencies, with the other UN agencies. And these agencies have already adopted Earth observation. FAO is already integrating a lot of Earth observations in their practices. UN Habitat, I've seen that Dennis is here in the list, is also starting to integrate Earth observations into their practices. And they do statistics, because all these agencies have this chief statistician who try to derive statistics from what they do. So things is happening. Things is happening at various levels. And I think we have to take this SDG as also an opportunity to really work together with the statistical community. And my last point is that we should never forget that a lot of the SDG indicators, the statistical community has never dealt with before, and often don't even have a more traditional statistic approach to this. They cannot report, they cannot derive statistics without using Earth observations, and they come to this point.
Yeah.
They
There's a sort of implication in what you're saying about trust and trust on the data going in, and I can understand that statisticians are really going to sort of try and get underneath the bonnet and understand. But Greg, you talked about algorithms, and I was slightly shocked by that, but it leads very much to the question that Jeff Smith is posing in the chat. So I think I'll just let Jeff ask his question, which presumably is directed more at Kevin or maybe at Greg. But Jeff, do you want to come in?
Hi, yes, thanks, Jeff. I've always been sort of confronted by this problem of trying to sell not sell satellite images, but present what we do in EO in the terms of images, whereas in fact most users, or particularly statistical offices, they're in the business of dealing with information. So I'm wondering if we should actually be presenting what we do to them as an information source rather than as an image data source. I mean, us in the Earth observation community, we love looking at images. That's why we're in here, I guess. But but if we're trying to sell that to someone else, we need to sell something that's going to help them with one of their pain points or with something they need to solve. So,
but that's what we did. That's what we do. I mean, it's clear that we done. I mean, when we promote Earth observation for the statistical community, sorry if I take the floor, we don't. We only show the satellite imagery just to that they realize how much data is available. The fact that we have a Sentinel-2 as overflight, of course, cloud permitting, every 5 days, and that was not possible before, and that's just amazing. And we always tell them, but it's not only now, it's also in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now. It's about continuity. But then, of course, it's not enough. You need to communicate the information you take from this. But maybe another point we have to say as well, we have to be we should never oversell, of course, what is available from Earth observation, and we have to be very transparent on the accuracy of the results.
Yeah. So, Kevin, what's your perception? Are we sending you images or information?
Okay, so from the general statistical perspective is that you have to back statisticians into a corner and indicate there's no other way of solving the problem. Okay, and then you have to bring a solution that statisticians have worked on and successfully achieved. So Greg knows this, he'll chuckle, but in Ireland we say it's bringing the cake to the party. You got to bring the cake to the party. You have to have something that's built, that works, and people can actually use. It's how we've done it for the SDGs. It's how we've done it. We've actually put the effort in. A lot of it is myself. We have a very, very, very small team. We've put the effort in, and we showed you can do it. So therefore, there's no excuses not to do it just because you're uncomfortable with the technology, or you go back to the basic issue of statisticians where they want the 5-year introduction in terms of analysis and so forth. So that's why that Mountain Green Index is very interesting, because you are right, the FAO have engaged with it, and they have put forward a generic solution to the Mountain Green Index. However, their generic solution doesn't fit all the countries. So therefore, you do have pushback at the IAG, where, I think Sweden said we don't have these mountains that you're looking at. We don't have these forests in these mountains. So the key would be to get the statistical offices to engage with producing some of the statistics using the EO. And that's really where I'm trying to get into that particular space and get a use case, which is a basic introductory use case where people then can follow through. Also, it could be useful that at, say, well, if we ever get to meet again in an IAG or something like that, you would have a side event where you'd have this basic introductory course, and you could engage with the statisticians who are there to produce something within an EO environment. And that would allow them to get the understanding, the touch and feel, then bring it back. And then also, as I said, from perspective, if you have, say, a CSO or an NSO like Central Statistics Office Ireland working this space, there's the example. So then you're actually working through. So from my perspective, and Greg knows this, I'm trying to promote this for Ireland, but I mean, I have to pitch in and do it. I mean, no one else is going to do it. So you need to say from if you've ever, I mean, because we're a small office in Ireland, I have lots of jobs. One of them is the civil service employment engagement. And in engagement, you need figure, dedication, and absorption. And the big thing here is absorption. People have to be able to absorb what EO can do, then have the vigor and the dedication to push it forward. It's going to be, it is a good solution, but yet again, it has to break through, should I say, the traditional statistical roadmaps that bring you in. Now, from a WGGI perspective, as I'm co-chairing that with Paloma from Mexico, who I'm sure you all know very well, we're producing a roadmap. And in that roadmap, we're trying to get this use case solution in at an introductory level where people can start using the EO and you can produce, for example, 15.3.1, our famous memory index. And I think that's it. We have to break into the environment and then have the use cases. Nice piece of cake for everybody to actually digest, but not, you know, and also, as I said, at the introductory level, we are not leaving people behind because of technology. The absorption is a big thing here. Thanks a lot, Greg.
Thanks, Kevin. I mean, this is great. There are so many directions I could take this in, but I'm going to be guided a little bit by the questions in the chat. Orestes Speyer is asking about the EU census. I don't know, Kevin, are you able to comment? Orestes, please, can you put your question, and then I don't know whether Kevin's able to answer it.
Yes, hello to everyone. A very interesting conversation. I was just wondering that since the 2021 Europe-wide census is coming up, and it's just between 2020 and the end of the SDG framework in 2030, so it's the only chance we have at this. And considering that I suppose it's a pretty big deal for all statisticians everywhere, if it could present a chance to give some, produce some good highlights of integration of comparisons between traditional statistics and Earth observation. So we say to the statisticians, look, this thing that it took so much effort to produce, we produce a comparable result with a disclaimer, and perhaps it's a good opportunity to push forward this integration. Yeah, that's my question.
Who can comment?
I can have one comment. So the censuses tend to be very traditional in countries. The reason is that a lot of economic planning is done around the census. So how it's done is quite traditional in many countries. Now there is a move to an e-version of the census, and it has been trialed successfully, but then in some countries unsuccessfully, like the issue that happened in Australia, where their last census, I think there was a denial of service attack on their servers. So there was a big issue that came from that. But the issue is that if you feel that there's a possibility to replicate the outputs of the census, because remember in the census, you're not only picking up the number of people, you've got occupation, industry, age, gender, locations. In Ireland, for example, travel to work, all these issues are actually there in it. So if you feel that there's an opportunity that at least in part that Earth observations will be able to replace or replicate what can be undertaken in what one would call a traditional census, I think that would be very interesting. But as I said, the power of the census is the granularity. It's all about the planning. Say, if you're in an area, and you know, if we look at say maybe 11.3.1 land consumption per population growth, if you're looking at something like that and the census is in there, the census will tell you the number of children. So therefore, the demand for schools, demand for doctors, GPs, hospitals, road networks, that all comes from there. So if the Earth observations, and I'm not sure because I'm very new to this particular space, if the Earth observations can add something to some of those particular areas, then what you're doing is that the stats office can focus on different parts of the census. Some of it can be replaced possibly through the EO, the rest then can be focused on through a traditional type of census. So that would, in my view, would be a mixed mode approach to it, where different you know, a different focus can be put on the census. But as I said, census itself is hugely detailed, and there's big pressures on all of the countries to get a census with as much granularity as possible. Thank you.
I guess a long time in the planning as well, so it's quite a long cycle to work with.
But if you allow me, maybe I can say something about this. There is already a use of Earth observation together with the census data. You know, population is actually used in many of the SDG indicators, and very often to a level of granularity that is not available from the census data, or at least from the census data that is available today. So what we are trying to do, and this is already the case, and this has already been applied to a number of indicators, it's to downscale, to disaggregate, let's say, sorry, I used the right word, to disaggregate the census data using the urban footprint. You know, the urban footprint is something that we can derive from Earth observations. So there are different models that use Earth observation to disaggregate the census data to a level of granularity that allows to report on a number of indicators. And this is quite complex, because you need to have you need not only to have the footprint of the buildings, you need to have also the vertical dimension, and you have to know if the land use as well, if people are working there, or if it's an office, or if it's a place where they live. But we already, there are a number of organizations that are very good into this, and the source of data needed is the footprint of the building, one of the source of data, or the 3D models of the buildings. And this is something that Earth observation can definitely bring.
We're running out of time. As I said, where everybody can stay and chat, but I just want to take Greg. ERSC, we've recently become an affiliated, I'm not sure if that's the right term, but affiliated member of the GGIM and the private sector network. We organize meetings like this to try and help educate and make people more aware. We organize an awards scheme, at least we did until this year. Unfortunately, this year we were unable to, or we had to take a decision back in April, just when everything was so uncertain, that we decided that we couldn't really go ahead with it. But we'll shortly go ahead next year. If you feel that that sort of scheme is useful to help with companies and bring companies into the picture, what else can we do to help?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks. A good question, Jeff. And let me just sort of say it right from the start, is the EO Awards on the SDGs, that program, which I've also been involved with the last few years, it actually was for me personally. Back. Yeah, I had a call come in. I just killed it. Sorry. Was really enlightening, and I think look, at the end of the day, we've just, when we think about the development of Earth observations over the past 30, 40 years, and we think about the development of geospatial information over the past 30 or 40 years, over our careers, how much that's developed. And one of the key things has always been about continue to communicate. You've just got to keep going. You keep just bashing at doors and telling people, are you aware of this capability? And sometimes it works and doesn't. One of the things about when UNGGIM was established, it actually it sort of got a global community together, and that's really grown quite considerably now. And it's got a broader engagement with industry, including with yourselves. But what we also realize, and what countries realize, is a lot of countries, particularly in governments, don't really understand the capabilities that are being delivered by industry, and particularly small startups, small enterprises. They'll go and develop really, and this is what I found with your awards, is some of the apps and capabilities and tools that were being developed were just amazing. We did a meeting in India a couple of years ago, and they did a whole session on small enterprises looking at how they manage the smoke and trying to reduce all the little wood burning stoves that are in homes and create all of the pollution and the deaths and all those things. And all of the work that's been done using Earth observations, all different apps, like what you've been doing in Europe, has just been really, just mind blowing, to be honest. And I think that's part of it. That's part of that engine and the cogs that are turning in the wheels. And I think from my perspective is that, you know, we've talked a little bit about the indicators, is that the indicators are really complex. But if we actually just looked at just goals and targets, and if we just thought of, you know, like even climate change, climate action 13, and you have a target in there about reducing vulnerability to climate and disaster risk. Now, straight away in the Earth observation community, go, yeah, we can do that. But as soon as you go into the indicators, you start scratching your head, because it's saying, you know, a number of people per population that have demonstrated they got a risk assessment, all these things, and it just doesn't work. So I think it's just continuously communicating and using that mechanism, and using GIM as a mechanism for that, because I think there's a colossal amount of corporate social good out there in the world, by industry, by the private sector, by startups, by SMEs. And I've learned a lot, and we have people all the time saying, how can we contribute? How can we contribute? And you ask them what they're doing, and they're saying, well, you are contributing. Where it's getting missed is that it's not being recognized into the national process. And I really do feel for that to a certain degree. And I think that's an important job we've got in GIM to ensure that a lot of that is realized. Hence, we have the private sector network. Hence, we have ERSC as an observer, a formal observer into the process. So it becomes part of that.
Yeah, I think so, and communication you emphasize, I think, is so important. And you know, this is one opportunity, but we need to create others that companies can sort of, you know, understand what they can be doing to help, because it's great just coming along and saying, well, we've got this new product, we've got this new service, you know, is this useful to you? But you're also evolving, and the indicators, and evolving the techniques, and maybe there are developments that are taking place in new systems, new algorithms, I'll come back to that, new processing techniques that can more meet your needs. So that communication has to work both ways. So I think that would be, if we can help enable that, then we should be we'll be doing our job.
Yeah, and I think that the hardest part for us as a technical community, the hardest part for us is to talk in really simple terms. Sometimes for us, we lose that straight away, and when we do that, others just don't quite understand it yet.
Talking the same language.
Yeah.
There are a number of people who've had questions in the chat, but I'm going to draw this to a close now. Please do stay online and you know, stay and have a chat. It's a free chat if you do. I thank very much Greg, Mark, and Kevin for spending the time with us this afternoon. We've had a very good discussion. It could easily have carried on for twice as long, I think. I wanted to explore with Kevin, maybe we can afterwards, a little bit about the COVID area, and there was a question in the chat about that as well, which is another subject for the future, maybe. So thank you very much for joining us. Thank all of you who've sat in to the EOcafe and listened. I hope you've got some ideas that have come out of it, and please feel free to share ideas with us. We're always looking for, you know, future EOcafes. We're developing quite an intense program, but we're always open to new ideas. The next EOcafe will be the last of the year in 2 weeks time. So same time, same place. We hope to make the year go out with a bit of a bang, to do something a bit different. Maybe forget a bit about this this rather rotten 2020 and look forward to a rather better 2021. So please come and join us then. We hope to have a very special guest who will join us. So come along and celebrate with us at the end of 2020. So that will be the end of this cafe. Please join us in the future, and yeah, let's stay around and have a chat. Thanks to everyone. Take care.
Goodbye, everybody.
Thanks very much.
Kevin, can I quickly jump in and